This is the iMac G4 from 2002, also known as the iLamp, the Sunflower iMac, or the iPewter. And this is the latest iMac. If you're not convinced yet, watch this. It moves, and the DVD drive sticks out like a tongue. Can a monitor arm do that? Didn't think so, but just 2 years later, Apple released the iMac G5, which just looks like a nice monitor, then sticked with this design ever since, and never mentioned the lamp ever again. What happened? Welcome back to The Void. You're watching your screen, and I'll answer that question in a few minutes. But first, some context. In 1997, Apple was in a bit of a pickle. Their OS sucked, their Macs were randomly generated words and numbers, and they spent a lot of time and money into dumb crap that didn't work, such as the Apple Newton, the Apple Pippin, the 20th anniversary Macintosh, and who could forget, the Power Mac 8100, which was the 8115 in Japan, or sometimes sold with additional crap as the Workgroup Server 8150, not to be confused with the similar looking but quite different Macintosh Quadra 800, or the Workgroup Server 80, or the Power Mac 8500, or the night. Fixing Mac OS was becoming more and more tricky, until they went it, and when shopping for an OS, they settled on Next, which was the company Steve Jobs made after being kicked out of Apple. When Jobs returned, he wisely noted the company's lack of which was weird because they had good designers, but were still making 27 different but also identical beige boxes. That was when Steve Jobs met his love interest and partner in crime, Johnny Ive. That's the guy who designed the 20th anniversary Macintosh, and with Steve's new job, he would design a lot more, most notably, the iMac G3, a massive success that came in 6 colors of translucent plastic. Outstanding. And over its lifespan of 4 years, the iMac got updated with more power and more colors. But it was getting old, and they were running out of colors, so it was time for a redesign, one that used new fancy technologies such as LCD displays, and the G4 processors, for more power, and increased good. An LCD wouldn't be that easy though, as the iMac G3 was designed around the enormous CRT screens. But what if you just put the computer sideways, behind the screen? Jobs hated it. First of all, it would fall, so let's add a foot. Secondly, the computer isn't quite flat anymore, and it's also slower and hotter, especially with the optical drives because this is 2002. And the cable were in front of your eyeballs, so that's fun. Though Apple wasn't the first to try this, there was the Gateway Profile from 1999, and the Monorail PC from 1996, and they weren't ideal. Just look at those bezels. Imagine if iPads looked like that. But then, Jobs had a brilliant idea. Ive was visiting Jobs' house, when he saw some sunflowers in his garden, and presumably said,
"What if the computer was a sunflower?"
He later rebranded that as,
"Why don't we let each element be true to itself? If the screen is flat, let it be flat. If the computer wants to be horizontal, let it be horizontal."
Interestingly, IBM reached the same conclusion with the NetVista X40, though it doesn't move, so it's objectively worse. Anyway, Ive was presumably touched from these nice words, and from there, they created a
radically new design
that is a
technical tour de force, with superior ergonomics
and with a
beauty and a grace that is going to last the next decade.
From an ominous podium and a rotating microwave dish, the new iMac was revealed. Steve touched the iMac in places it couldn't even imagine, with some people in the audience positively putting their pants over the fact that it swivels.
And it swivels 180 degrees as well. Amazing.
The screen
literally floats in midair.
Truly
unbelievable.
The computer sits on that base, with the disk drive on the front, the ports on the back, holes for cooling on the top and bottom, and they were kind enough to still let you open their computers back then, even if it left the iMac in quite an unflattering position. Apple is American, so they conveniently used a CD case for scale.
It's really wonderful.
That's a 15-inch screen for only $12.99. And over the following months they released a widescreen 17-inch model for $17.99, and a 20-inch model for $21.99, which CNET called a bit hard to swallow solely for the pleasure of a few extra inches of display. Apple knew this, so they also released the iMac in the same year. It's just an iMac G3 but sadder. It doesn't even have a handle. If you're wondering how useful the adjustment actually is, take this quote from 2002 Macworld.
Long-time computer users might scoff at those numbers and question just how often people really need to reposition their displays. But once we started repositioning the display, we couldn't stop. Over the course of many hours working with this computer, we found ourselves positioning it to match our movements. Rather than sitting still to get a good view of the display, we were able to move it to match our preferences. And when you want to show something on your screen to others, it's great to be able to rotate the screen to face them, rather than asking them to sit down in your chair to take a gander.
I don't have an iMac G4 to prove this myself though. But also remember that monitor arms are a thing, and there's people that buy them. I don't doubt my mom would use it if it came with the computer, plus, you can do so much more with the design. For example, here's an idea for the iMac Pro. The real iMac Pro is just a darker unibody iMac. Apple's Pro line definitely has design. Anyway, I couldn't come up with a good transition, so let's travel to Paris to see Apple's new doohickeys and thingamabobs at Apple Expo 2004. At the Apple Expo in Paris, Phil Schiller announced the new iMac. They already referred to the G4 as the new iMac though, so I guess this is the newer iMac. Steve Jobs was recovering from surgery, so we had to settle with Phil Schiller.
Can't innovate anymore, my ass.
I mean, no offense, but he's no Steve Jobs.
Always at our beck and call, except occasionally when he forgot who he was and needed to be restarted.
This was a weird keynote too. Basically he just said that the iMac is great and all, but it's time to redesign it. We just have to redesign it immediately. We got to get the world record for most redesign.
So that really begs the question, what would the creators of the iPod do for their next computer? Well, I'd like to be the first to show you the all-new iMac. And that's what the new iMac looks like.
What would the genius and extremely attractive people behind the Doomsday device think? Well, here's the Doomsday device too, and that's a photo of it.
Also, the iMac G4 was released after the iPod, and Apple has one design team for all of their hardware, so this is
not representative of reality.
Rather than just the display now floating in the air over your desk, the entire computer floats in the air on an aluminum foot over your desk.
I don't think it feels that much like it's floating, especially when you can barely move it. If only it used a stand that allowed more movement. I don't hate this design though, it just makes me a bit sad. What I do hate though, is this keynote. I wonder where they got the idea to reveal the computer like that.
Just like the previous iMac, you can set your display anywhere you want, just as you want it to be.
Except for the height.
But it's all together in one simple package, all the I/O along the right-hand side together.
Pretty sure every iMac had that.
Don't you hate how disconnected iPhones are? Who would design something like that? Anyway, we put the screen inside the phone.
Let's zoom in on the I/O. Again, it's all aligned, more accessible than it's ever been on any personal computer.
Sir. Pretty accessible to me.
You're also the first to see the insides of the new iMac G5, and it's just as wondrous as the outside.
Aww. Maybe I'm slightly mad, so let's hear a word from today's sponsor.
Do you ever feel like nothing is real and it's all just a figment of your imagination?
I'm sure you were bamboozled, and even flabbergasted, by the new doohickeys and thingamabobs at Apple Expo. It might have even distracted you from the fact that you were in France. So let's see some reviews. Oh no, it's busted. I didn't find many, and this one just called the keyboard lame, so make of that what you will. A lot of the reviews also mention there's no height adjustment, so it'd be cool if Apple added that. Another fun thing is that G5 iMacs tended to overheat a lot, and the PowerMac G5, which is the only other Mac with a G5, has a whole section for defects on its Wikipedia page. Quite tragic. That is because, much like Apple's founder, the G5 processors could get quite heated, way more than the older G4, and they could never get it on a laptop without it exploding and dying. Mac in Touch found a 31% failure rate in the original 20-inch iMac G5s, which is, bad. They got it to be a whopping 11% in the newer models. I think that's also related to why they abandoned the sunflower lamp thing design. I'm not sure how a design that's pretty much a bigger laptop that's not portable is any better for cooling, but they did release the iMac G5, so I can only assume the prototypes were fire hazards. I'm also not sure why they couldn't wait for the transition to Intel-like laptops had to, but okay. However, if you look closely, Johnny Ive is a big fan of minimalism, so much so that he simplified his name, and if you look even more closely, the iMac G4 is 3 shapes, while the G5 is just 2. Also, the ARM is expensive, but this is Apple, so no one gives a shit. It does also develop a droop over time, as you can see here if you look very closely. That's an iMac from 20 years later, though, so I'm not sure. The real reason why they did this atrocity, though, I think, it was quite tricky researching this video, is the screen. The base has to compensate for the weight of the display, otherwise it would disappointingly fall and die. And it had to balance for pushing or pulling the display too. The original 15-inch model weighs 9.7 kg. The 17-inch one weighs a bit more, at 10.4 kg, and the 20-inch model weighs, you guessed it, 18.2 kg. And that's a bit heavier than the iMac G3. For more comparison, the iMac G5's 20-inch model is only 11 kg, and that was just a year after the older 20-inch iMac. And I don't think they were making breakthroughs in screen technology that fast. And Apple definitely wanted to make the screen bigger, as they dropped the 15-inch model with the G5, and by 2007 you could only get it for 20 or 24 inches. And the lamp wouldn't scale well for that. They could make the base larger too, but it would take up more space, but also would be more expensive due to economies of scale. Apple could probably do this design today, or maybe even a few years into the transition to Intel, but they didn't, and probably won't anytime in the future, probably because it would be pretty lame for a company to go,
look at our new product, it is objectively superior to our old crap, give me money.
And then a few years later going,
never mind.
By the way, the patent already expired, but this isn't legal advice. At the end of the day, does it matter that much? Not really.
Who wants to see some of that classified next level, huh?